Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Frontline Club and to our first of the Frontline Showcase events this evening with Vice News. Thanks for coming, despite the tube strike. I'm going to hand you over to Richard Gisbert from Listening Post at Al Jazeera in a second. Before I do, if I can just ask you to switch your phones to silent, and if you've got any questions, if you can wait for the microphone because we're broadcasting live. And the format for this evening, we'll have about 50 minutes of discussion and we'll show some of the Vice News footage. Then we'll go downstairs for some complimentary drinks thanks to Chivas. And then we'll come back up for a wider discussion about the changing news landscape. So over to Richard.
Thanks, Millicent. We're running a few minutes behind schedule here. I'd like to say that's part of the plan and providing a break for some people with transport difficulties, but it's probably not the case. So we may run a couple of minutes over in the first session. We may push back the second session by a few minutes, but we'll try to keep it to time. I'm going to start off just talking about Vice a little bit, what I know of the company, just as an observer. I do a show at Al Jazeera called The Listening Post. We cover media. We've had some cross-pollination with Vice people over the last few years. People who've worked with us, now with Vice, and flowing the other way as well. And then we're going to show a few clips, then we're going to talk about Vice, then we have the second discussion afterwards. I come from Ottawa in Canada. I remember many, many years ago spending time in Montreal in a very cool magazine called Voice, or The Voice, which was a cultural magazine in Montreal that was eventually bought by Shane Smith and his partners in crime at the time. A bit of an Ottawa mafia. And Ottawa has also incidentally produced a few other editors. Graydon Carter, Vanity Fair, also from Ottawa. Tyler Brule from Wallpaper, and now Wink Creative, also from Ottawa. So there's something in the water there. I wasn't drinking it, and I ended up on television. Vice then decamped for Brooklyn, as most of you know. And I don't think I have to give you too many biographical details, because as someone has pointed out to me, this audience is about 20 years younger than the audience that we have here for most of these kinds of discussions. So I suspect you people know a lot about the company. Watching it grow from a distance, and with a slightly detached interest, though, it's been very interesting to see the change in culture, what Vice covers, the culture that Vice creates, the journalism it produces, and now we're starting to hear about this company, and even people who were probably consuming some of the video or the media in some way without being conscious of it, probably became conscious of the company for the first time with the North Korea story, the basketball diplomacy story that Vice came up with taking Dennis Rodman, because Kim Jong-un was a big basketball fan. And that was, and Vice was in the global spotlight really with video, and a big story, I think for the first time, it's fair to say. There was some quibbles, but I think it was, about some of the journalism that was produced and compromises that have to be made, that every organization has to make when it gets to North Korea. I thought most of those were sour grapes. This was a global coup, and it was cleverly conceived and I think very nicely executed. Vice was also more prominent recently with Simon Ostrovsky, one of your correspondents, who, full disclosure, has also worked for us. The Listening Post has taken a hostage for 3 days in Crimea, or in eastern Ukraine. The journalism, I think, feels a little bit more like Hunter S. Thompson than it does Edward R. Murrow. That's not to everyone's taste. We're going to talk about some of the issues around that and some of the concerns I'm sure will be raised from the floor on the editorial side. But it's a fascinating company. The media I think it's producing is very interesting. So I just want each of our guests here to introduce themselves, tell us very quickly what they do at the company, and then after that I'm going to ask Alex to tell us about the new channel and what distinguishes it from the video that we've already seen produced on Vice on a different platform. Is this a rebrand on the run? Is it a real departure? And perhaps you can speak to that. But why don't each of our guests introduce themselves and let us know what kind of journalism you do for the organization.
Hi, I'm Aris Roussenos. I'm a journalist at Vice, obviously primarily conflict journalism.
What kind of places?
Syria, Mali, South Sudan, Egypt, Lebanon.
And where did you work before Vice?
All over the place. I was freelance for a few years. I stole stuff to like CNN, Channel 4 News.
Yeah.
Before I worked at the BBC and ITL.
Milan?
Yeah, my name is Milan Larson. I'm a producer and reporter for Vice and mainly Vice News. Been with the company for almost a decade, which has been an interesting and exciting ride.
And where were you before then, or were you?
I was a Scandinavian editor before I came to the UK, so Stockholm.
Yeah. Alex?
I'm Alex Miller. I'm the editor-in-chief of Vice UK. I've been here for about 5 years now. Came on to work on the online stuff back when I managed to convince them they needed a website. And yeah, I've been lucky enough to kind of grow through the ranks, and I also present films for us and quite a large number of things for Vice News as well currently.
And where were you before?
I was working at the NME writing about punk music.
I'm interested, which is the more conservative organization? NME, administratively, NME or Vice? Because often this doesn't go the way you think it would.
Definitely the NME, although, I don't know, it was a long time ago. Vice has changed a lot as an organisation, but it's still a place which is very open-minded in that, you know, young people are given budgets to do projects that they're very passionate about, and I think that's one of the best things about our organisation.
Tell us about the new channel. What is different with this than to what we've seen before?
Okay, well, I mean, we've been doing online video for a long time. When we started, everyone said that online video had to be two things. It had to be short, and it had to be videos of cats pissing around in baths. And we did the exact opposite, and we went out and we made loads of long-form documentaries, basically. Some were quite light-hearted, some were more serious, and I think one of the interesting things for us was that it was the serious stuff that was getting the most attention from our viewers, you know. It was the newsier stuff we were doing that was getting, you know, the kind of, I don't know, the most passionate support. So Vice News, in a way, it's grown from that. In a way, we've been nudged towards it by watching the things that our viewers are interested in. And so we've been making a lot of stuff. Vice News before was a strand on vice.com where we produced a lot of videos all around the world and stuff. And then eventually we thought, well, look, let's have it in one place, because we have a channel for music, we have a channel for food, we have a channel for dance music, we have a channel for technology. Why is vice.com, why are we pushing all the news into vice.com when it should just be its own place? And I think that's worked for us, because anyone who's familiar with Vice will know that we cover some stupid, weird shit. And news is really serious, and it deserves to be in its own space.
Okay, we're going to get some examples of the video journalism now. Aris, tell us about what it is we're about to see, when it went to air.
Went to in January. We were with the South Sudanese Army as we embedded with them as they went up to Bor in Jonglei State. It was a sort of dog and pony show for them. They wanted to show how they'd taken control of the situation from the rebels, how they're about to capture Bor. We're going to be the first journalists in to see their glorious victory. And we got hit, and it didn't turn out like that.
I've seen this video. Yeah, you guys were in the thick of it, weren't you? Here we go.
That's the point.
We're woken up by the sound of vehicles outside. Looks like they're getting ready to move on Bor. Hopefully we'll come with them. Will we be able to follow your troops up to Bor?
Yes. So you are free to cover our movement from where we are to the objective.
Yeah, we need you to go and see. Exactly.
Before first light, General Gatwich's commandos moved out towards Bor. As the sun rose, the SPLA infantry preparing to join them sang their war chants before battle, a tradition from the long days of guerrilla war against the north. Morale was high as the lead elements of the force pulled into position. Two battalions of infantry had been sent up the Nile by boat from Juba. It would be their job to take Bor, and they seemed to look forward to the battle ahead. In some ways, they looked and moved like a professional army, but the overall effect at times was of a tribal militia. It was time to move. We'd been held back from the infantry at the head of the column, for our own safety, the SPLA said. Instead, they placed us in the rear convoy, made up of the divisional headquarters with all the generals, supply troops, police, and a motley assortment of untrained Dinka civilians, given uniforms and weapons and packed off to the war. As we moved, the government forces made their weapons ready, trained soldiers giving their inexperienced volunteers last-minute tutoring on how to use their rifles. Government troops had been attacked here just 2 days earlier. We drove slowly through an eerie landscape of abandoned villages.
That was the recent attack, the day before yesterday.
You think the rebels have all run away from Bor?
They have not run away, they are there. They are not intending to run, they want to make it at their base.
Suddenly, a few shots rang out from the bush to our right. The convoy halted as soldiers tried to find the source of the fire.
It was driving up to the front line when they heard gunfire. The troops leapt out of the vehicles and facing towards that direction. They're all taking up position. This might be it. We're not far from Bor now.
The officers in charge ordered the troops back into their vehicles. This was just the warning of the trouble that would lie ahead. The rebels' ambushes would escalate in severity as they tested the convoy's strength and willingness to fight. Burned out tanks dotted the way ahead from the last time the government fled Bor, just a week or so earlier. Suddenly, there was a second burst of fire from our right.
We're just driving ahead into Bor. You can see the smoke from Bor burning in the distance, and then there was rifle fire to the right of us. We all jumped out.
The thick bush on our flank was meant to have been cleared by the infantry ahead of us, but clearly the rebels were still around and still up for a fight. The slow-moving convoy was a vulnerable target, as the mobile headquarters for the whole assault, with all the generals riding with us. It was the brain of the whole operation. If the rebels could take us out, the whole assault on Bor would be in danger. No one realised that the bloodiest ambush of the day was lying just ahead of us.
We're just on the outskirts of Bor. As soon as we hit the river crossing, it kicked off big time. There was incoming machine gun fire. The SPLA troops here returned fire with rockets mounted to the back of the truck. It's all chaos. They're pushing forward to clear the area straight ahead of us, the rebels.
Pulled back to some huts to try and get behind cover. There wasn't much.
The enemy on this side are in the bush. They ambushed us as we came through. There's a heavy exchange of fire now, machine gun fire on both sides, as the government troops are really trying to push through the bush to attack the rebels who ambushed us. It's unclear what we're going to do from here. We've got the Nile on our side here. We're kind of hemmed in between the rebels and the river.
It was a scene of utter chaos. There seemed to be little coordination between the different elements making up the convoy. While the infantry escorts mostly fought back, most of the police and militia ran around in circles without any direction from officers or NCOs.
We just asked these soldiers what actually happened. It's a pretty chaotic scene. And they said just behind that tree line, just there, the head of the convoy we were travelling in got ambushed, had a few soldiers killed. The enemy is still in there somewhere, so they're working out what to do next.
According to an officer I spoke to later, over 20 government soldiers were killed in this ambush, including a senior general and 3 of his bodyguards. The wounded and the dead were gathered together to be brought back to Juba by boat. Without any medics in the field, the outlook for the most seriously wounded was grim. A few rebel bodies lay scattered about the village. It had been a costly few minutes. bring up reinforcements, a whole battalion of infantry, the ones we saw earlier. We're going to head back on these speedboats to Juba with the dead and wounded. The General's body was taken back to Sudan Safari to be helicoptered back to Juba.
We are not going! We are not going!
It's a casualty here.
Get in! Stop, let him in. Everybody get in.
A dog and pony show gone wrong. Were there any, and that's in January, so it's a different phase from where the story is right now. And were there any other American news organizations in there at the time looking for the kind of access that you got on?
No, not at all. I think CNN went to Juba for a few days, that's it.
So, what's that like, having the story to yourself? I mean, and how does that make you feel as a journalist that you're the only guy in there on, on this end of it?
In fairness, the BBC were there as well on that particular trip, and they got some pretty good footage. But South Sudan, I think it's an immensely important story, and it's interesting you mentioned the American angle, obviously, because America has a lot at stake there. America had a lot of influence, a lot of say in the creation of South Sudan as an independent country. So there's a sort of moral duty to report on the essential failure of South Sudan as a state.
This is a 5-part series. In any of the other parts, were you able to get at the political side of the story, the geostrategic side of the story? Because often Sudan is just put down as some kind of quote-unquote tribal conflict and described in a way that in another part of the world we would use words like sectarian. Were you able to get at stuff like that as well?
Actually, personally, I don't think it's unfair to describe it as a tribal conflict. Like, tribal divisions are a very strong factor in South Sudanese society. I've worked quite a lot in South Sudan, and a lot of the tribal tensions that have fled into open conflict now were simmering there for a long, long time. In early parts, we hung out with high-ranking generals and went to press conferences, and then we put it in the sort of context of the country's recent history.
Yeah, and you have an appetite for that as well from your editors, because the editors always do like the bang. But and I'm just wondering how the appetites compare, because when I worked for ABC News, I was covering a different conflict. But when I wanted to get into the nitty-gritty of, the divisions and the politics, sometimes that was a harder sell for me. How do you find it?
One thing that I really admire, one thing that makes me really happy at working at Vice is I've got pretty much absolute editorial freedom. Yeah. So, given if that had been on a news, like cable news network, that had been, a 3-minute clip, and he wouldn't go into, any context or any sort of background. Yeah. Because we have a sort of longer format, we're on the internet, we can expand the story to as long as we want, essentially. We're not hemmed in by, sort of run times. So we can go into as much detail as we can. And I think there is actually an appetite. Like, if you read YouTube comments, and I always do.
That's bad for you.
The stupidest mistake in the world.
There is, an appetite for knowledge, a thirst for knowledge, and why not feed it?
Totally. Are there any questions from the audience on this round? Who's got a microphone? And we'll get to, next up we'll have Milen's film, right? Go ahead. Identify yourself.
Yes, Jonathan Charles, hi. I thought it was a very interesting film, and actually in the Syria one as well that you did. And I used to cover conflict as a foreign correspondent for the BBC. And I noticed, I'm interested really in your storytelling, because I noticed, there's some bits what I describe as traditional television news storytelling in there, use of sound, some of the ways of bringing the story alive. So I wondered what you borrowed from traditional television news, but also what you absolutely rejected from television news in your way you tell a story, so to bring it alive in a different way.
In terms of influences, I've always seen myself influenced by sort of longer form documentaries that came out of the sort of Yugoslav civil wars, particularly. The Valley is the film I wish I could have made. I really like Pavel Pawlikowski as well. Serbian epics. There's a sort of, I didn't film that much of that, but you can see it's beautifully shot by my expert cameraman, Phil Caller. There's a sort of lyrical quality, I think, to a lot of our filmmaking. aesthetics is a really important aspect. So that's something that
I think it's because we come from a documentary background. Before we were doing kind of short news things, we were making kind of long form docs. So there's a soundtrack on it, and we like to think that even if we're shooting something short or whatever, it should have as much kind of thought going into the aesthetic, the presentation of it, as though we're going to show in a cinema or something like that.
I suppose what I'm getting at is there anything that's different, say, between the way you would do a panorama type on a conflict or dispatches and what you're doing?
I don't know. I wouldn't say that's too different from the horror of Holmes, particularly.
Yeah.
It's not actually far off a Vice piece.
But I guess the point is the platform, the format, the fact you can run it as long as you like, and whereas on the BBC website you often do have expanded versions of stories that have been broadcast, that's not the primary function, is it? And when we all know that working within those organizations, when they ask us to do that second version of it, we all have a little whinge. We all say, we totally get that the internet is totally the future, might save our lives, but we don't want to do it. But that's you're there primarily for the site and for that platform. I'm going to take one more question on this before we move on to Milen's film, because we've got to keep it moving. Go ahead. Your name, please, and if you want to give an affiliation or a reason for your interest.
Name's Sean Langan. I make documentaries, not news. What I don't get, I wish Vice all the best, because anything covering, I make Third World War documentaries, which are on prime time. But to be honest with you, I think there's a little bit of a myth and a hype going on, which I've gone on to, not coming from news, this to me looks like something Reuters could have done, or Unreported World. And it's not just from that I've seen, it's from your stuff from Crimea, where some guy's walking around with a big microphone looking like a 1970s news reporter.
Who's got a microphone in the Crimea film?
I don't know if it's the guy arrested, but I just went on to have a look. Some guy going around. It was a little bit glib, sorry, but like you, I come from sort of features music background. But I'm slightly in defense. My affiliation is with the Frontline, and there's a lot of people here who work for mainstream news, foreign news. But we've been doing this, and people. No, I don't. When I say we, people at this club, I wouldn't even put myself up there. But I can't see that you're doing anything different. That it's not any longer form. You do short form, and I'm just wondering: is it really a case that people have come to your site because they've lost faith in the mainstream media? It's more of an indictment of how the reputation is so bad that young kids will trust you. And I think that's interesting, but without being too unfair, I haven't seen anything on Vice News that I couldn't have seen anywhere else.
Sorry, was that a question?
No.
Let me,
Not really.
I mean, I think you've got a point about the mainstream news thing. I used to have a line which I now think is a bit grandiose and stupid, about how young people trust us and the way the British people used to trust the BBC. But it kind of stands up to a certain degree. I think that you're right. That piece of Harris's work, you could see it on other platforms and things like that. But the point is, we made that, and someone else didn't make that, and it has value in it being a good piece of work. I guess what's exciting and revolutionary about Vice, aside from the tone, which I think you might see there's a differing tone in some of the films that we're going to show tonight, is the platform. It's the fact that it's on the internet, and the fact that a lot of people didn't think that anyone in the world had the appetite to watch this kind of thing on the internet. And more importantly, a lot of people didn't think that young people had the appetite to watch this kind of work. And I think that you've probably always known that was bollocks. But the people in charge didn't know it was bollocks. And I think that perhaps all we're revealing is that everyone's always cared, and people care about the planet. And that's what we're revealing. We're not saying we're completely reinventing the wheel. I mean, it's quite nice for people in editorials to kind of, or as The Economist said, deliver our news with a dollop of sass and hip-hop, which I'm still not sure what it means. But I don't think that we claim to be changing the news landscape as far as going out there and getting stories are. All we're doing is telling stories.
Let me just make one point on that question from my perspective, and that is, I can understand why within a British audience sometime, where you have the BBC and where you have Channel 4 and where you have Sky and ITV, it doesn't really look that extraordinary to you, because the BBC will commit resources, maybe not as many as Al Jazeera does, to a story like South Sudan. You just got to remind yourself, this is a news organization that's headquartered in New York City, and it's the only news organization headquartered in New York City that will send people to South Sudan an American, for an American market, now going for a global market. So that 6 minutes of content anywhere on South Sudan, shot to a high standard, a story well told, for an American audience, even a Canadian audience, that's the revolutionary idea. It may seem somewhat less revolutionary to you here, because no matter how much regardless how much you complain about the BBC and your media here, you have it so much better here than they have over there. So take my word on that. Let's move on to Milen's film. Can you tell us a little bit about it before we see it?
So the film we're going to watch is called Young and Gay in Putin's Russia. It came out about a month before the Sochi Olympics. And as the title implies, it's a long-form reportage about what it's like for young gay people in Russia when an attitude, and what happens to society as well, when an attitude like homophobia becomes law.
Okay, here we go.
В любом возрасте вы можете открыть себе новое начало, гомосексуальное. Неважно, кто вы, гомосексуалист, лесби, бисексуал или трансгендер. Вы личность, вы индивид. Вы тот, кто вы есть. Не нужно бояться, не нужно стесняться.
We're in Moscow to find out what it's like to be young and gay in Putin's Russia. Because gays have suddenly been made enemies of the state, and this has led to a rise of homophobia and some pretty horrific attacks and murders. In June, an anti-gay propaganda law was passed countrywide, which bans telling minors that homosexuality is normal. This means that if you're 16 and you just realize that you're gay, you have nowhere to turn for support, because it's now illegal for parents, teachers, and even psychologists to tell you that it's okay to be gay.
Можно сказать, что быть геем в России – это значит жить в шкафу, но этот шкаф очень большой и очень удобный.
Принятием нового закона начались репрессии.
Конечно, люди смотрели очень-очень косо, это были дикие взгляды, очень такие взгляды каких-то животных. Очень тяжело быть геем в путинской России.
You really can get killed in broad daylight in this town during a gay rights protest.
Мы не готовы жить в шкафу, мы не готовы лгать. Либо вы нас принимаете такими, какими есть, либо вообще никак нет.
Upon arriving in Moscow, we heard that gay people have their own taxi service. We arranged for one of their drivers to take us around during our stay. Why is there a need for a gay taxi service?
На самом деле сейчас сложно все-таки находиться в этом обществе. Вот недавно в Петербурге произошла перестрелка в районе как раз-таки центральной станции, и я просто видел эту видеозапись саму с этого места, в тот момент снимали на телефон. И стреляли с криками «пидорасы, идите отсюда», да, то есть убивать вас всех. Ну, как бы из этого у меня только один вывод может быть сделан мною. То, что в этой стране, конечно, для гей-сообщества... Но когда не говоришь о том, что ты гей, то как-то все спокойно и хорошо. Стоит только заикнуться, и немного сложнее становится жить. Вот был такой же наглядный пример в каком-то городе. Там парень рассказал своим друзьям, что он гей, они ему в задницу толкали 2 пивные бутылки и 3-ю хотели, но она не влезла. Как бы примеры такие.
The anti-gay propaganda law has prompted an increase in homophobic violence. For example, the 23-year-old in Volgograd our driver talked about, who was tortured to death with beer bottles. There has also been a rise in vigilante groups, like the neo-Nazi Occupy Pedophilia, that hunt down homosexuals online and make YouTube clips of how they abuse them, sometimes to death. These crimes are rarely investigated, and the authorities have referred to them as civil movements fighting the sins of society. Because of the violence, young homosexuals feel the need to protect themselves. We met with Yulia, a young lesbian who started LGBT self-defense classes after her favorite gay bar in Moscow was attacked by about 20 armed men in October 2012.
There was an attack in the gay nightclub a year ago, and after that I understood that I can be punched in the street, I can be punched in the nightclub, I can be punched on a demonstration, well, just anywhere, because people are homophobes. They are just against us, and they're not afraid of police, they're not afraid of government. They just come and kill gay people. So you need to defend your life, and you need to defend yourself with the most effective techniques. This is the center of murdering you. Okay. If you punch the center, he's not going to murder you. If you do it like that or like that, he's not thinking anymore. Because of this law, some conservative and aggressive people have decided that it's okay to kill gay people because we want to protect our children, we want to protect our society from these crazy gays, and we have seen lots of suicides among young people since publishing that law. So it's not protecting, definitely.
So, how long were you in Russia for? How many pieces did you produce?
So I went to Russia about 3-4 times last year doing different things, but this one took 2 trips.
Again, if there are any questions, get your hands up. You've been there for 10 years, so you've watched this organization grow, and you know that you have a reasonably young demographic. It got Rupert Murdoch's attention. I think he threw $70 million at the company for a piece of it. He was watching his demographic age at Fox News. I guess he wanted to go young. I'm wondering how you felt. And there may be a question on the film itself, but when you heard Murdoch was investing in Vice, were you feeling conflicted at all? Or did you feel that you were being, knighted by the guy with the magic touch in the media? And if that's the case, I will remind you that he dropped $580 million on MySpace.
It's going to come back, man.
Oh, yeah. We're still waiting.
I'm just going to talk from the perspective of a producer at Vice. This means that we get more money to do the things that we like. I have never spoken to him. I have never heard any. I mean, as Iris says, the amazing thing about working for Vice, and one of the reasons why I've stayed for this long, is that you're pretty much, I mean, of course you get a lot of advice and we talk through all our films before we put them out, but you get a lot of editorial freedom. So that hasn't affected the way I think or do my films. And if people are willing to invest money in us producing more content, then that's great.
And I think that investment also at that rate allowed Shane Smith to value the company, at least verbally, at $1.4 billion.
Hi, Jill Pennington, I'm CNN. I'm just wondering, which of those pieces did better in terms of clicks? And does that affect your news-gathering decision-making?
I guess I'm probably best placed to answer that. I think Young and Gay did very, very well. And, I mean, that's not to say that yours didn't, but that it actually did particularly well. And I think that's because it's something which means an awful lot to our audience, as I'm sure Milen will attest to. But no, I can honestly say that that does not affect the way we think about news. I mean, we're lucky. We have a huge suite of channels, and there are some elements of our company, such as our music channels and our tech channels, which are perhaps more suited to kind of, like being the money-making wings of the organization. As anyone who works in TV knows, it's, probably won't make you millions from news. And no, we are very lucky that isn't a consideration. And in general, if Milen has a story she really wants to tell, or if Aris has a story he really wants to tell, basically all they have to do is shout at Kevin, who's somewhere over there, and he'll back them.
But I can add something as well, is that we're launching a news channel. We're not only going to do conflict reporting, we're not only going to do human interest stories, we need to do a mix of everything. And I guess what you do really well is go to dangerous places that I would probably think twice before going to. Whereas, and you do really interesting, attention-grabbing pieces about that, and maybe you know, I can find stories. I'm really interested in how current events affect people on the ground, especially young people. And, you know, all of that is needed. And if one thing happens to grab more attention than something else, that's just, I guess, life.
It's only that the hard bit in news that we find is you've got a finite budget. You have to make decisions about, you know, what to send on, where to spend the money. So how do you kind of make that, how do you do that editorial prioritization, I guess?
Well, I think some things like, I don't know, Maiden, like, you just can't ignore it, right? And you think that we can probably tell a different side of the story to the one that everyone else is telling. But other things, you know, we're quite lucky. So I think that one of the reasons why there's space for us in the news sphere is that a lot of organisations chase the news cycle. And that's understandable because you need your BBCs and your CNNs and everyone telling that, otherwise that news cycle vanishes. But as Shane likes to say, the problem with the news cycle is that sometimes it can be like when, like, 7-year-olds play football and the ball goes over here and everyone runs over here and the ball goes over there and everyone runs over there. And the benefit for us then is that it leaves some space. And, I mean, you know, Aris, do you think you've got things commissioned here that you wouldn't have got elsewhere?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, like Alex said earlier, if it was just about clickbait, then we'd only make videos about cats.
Say that again?
We did do that as well.
You know, in some ways it's almost like a sort of moral imperative, like some stories just should be told, so we make them, whether people watch them or not, you know, but generally they do.
Let me just take you up on that one point, and you guys may not be the right people to talk to about that. It might be Jason Mojica, who...
Your protege.
Your news overlord who used to work for me. And I think Vice is very good about going to places that other North American media and some global news organizations don't go to. And, you know, sometimes I think you're guilty of, you know, sort of sometimes playing some serious situations for laughs, you know, some economic basket cases. Look how bad it is here. But at least you're there telling the story. And possession is 9/10 of the law, and you own the story. So you're 90% of the way there. The story that Vice isn't good at is Washington.
Mm-hmm.
And other media aimed at a young audience, Rolling Stone, they go after Washington hard because they know that corporate media will not cover certain stories. Michael Hastings was working for Rolling Stone when he took down McChrystal in Afghanistan. That was a huge story. Matt Taibbi routinely on Rolling Stone goes after Wall Street in a way that corporate media simply cannot. I don't see any of that from Vice. So it's great that you're here in these parts of the world, but I think what Americans would really want is for Vice to put some of its smarts, its resources, and its commitment into covering Washington at a time where you desperately need a different kind of journalism there. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I think you might have a point there, and I can only speak from a British perspective.
Right. Which is why I want Mojica here.
Yeah, exactly.
But he's watching the live stream, I know, pulling the levers.
Someone get him to tweet
Brooklyn,
something.
yeah, he's stroking his kid. Yeah. I know this.
But from a British perspective, I mean, it's not particularly far away from what I was saying about the news cycle. I kind of feel like the BBC and Channel 4 and everyone else and The Guardian do a good job covering Westminster politics. But I think that leaves space for us to go elsewhere. And I think that, you know, of course, when Vice Video first became successful, what we were known for was travel docs. And in a way, we've taken that philosophy and we've moved it into a news sphere. Yeah. That doesn't mean we don't do local stories. Yeah. I mean, I just did a film in East London. I mean, you've done things in Stockholm, which is local to you.
I think they should ship all three of you guys to Washington. Because you're all smart and you can bring a different perspective. Tell us about your film.
Okay, so this is going to be a dispatch from Venezuela, which was filmed in February, I think. And the reason I chose this is because what we did in Venezuela was kind of a good model for how we want to move forward with Vice News. Kind of a small crew of 3 going out to cover some protests which were being largely and understandably ignored while Ukraine was fucking shitbit. And while we were there, we shot kind of 6 or 7 short dispatches that we'd cut overnight, put up the next morning, and then we also shot 8 hours worth of live streaming from protests after kind of basically begging our way into some people's flats and things like that to kind of get a vantage point for, and that was very important in a place where they weren't showing any of this on television, and we got a huge kind of, in a way, we became local television for those nights when we were covering them live. And we're currently cutting a long form half an hour, kind of more thoughtful, serious piece about about why exactly Venezuela's been.
That's like one of the trailers that's longer than the movie. But we appreciate it. Here we go.
Yesterday the protesters shut down the city by driving a convoy all around the streets, through the motorways, shutting it down. Today they've done the same, but with thousands and thousands of people. It may be true that this is a protest largely made up of a minority of middle-class people, but when there are this many people on the streets, there's no way Maduro can ignore it.
Ellos pretenden imponernos a nosotros el discurso de la polarización. Lo digo hoy, lo dije ayer y lo digo mañana. Esto no es una lucha de opositores contra chavistas. Esto es una lucha del pueblo contra el gobierno por ineficiente, corrupto.
The 5 marches all converged in Place Briand. There were some speeches from the students, from the opposition, and now everyone's dispersing, although word on the street is that a lot of people are going to be heading to Altamira Square. One guy stopped us and said, go to Altamira Square, but bring your helmets. Seems like quite a few people have gathered here, although it's quiet at the moment. Right next to Altamira Square is this old, I don't know, abandoned space where there clearly used to be some kind of large construction, and people are mining it for weaponry and barricades, basically. They're tearing down a brick structure over there, taking the metal poles, and they'll be putting them on the streets to stop the guard coming through later.
Miedo tenemos todos los días cuando vamos a la universidad, miedo tenemos todos los días cuando salimos a las calles, miedo tenemos todo el tiempo y ya estamos obstinados a tener miedo.
It's nothing like what we've seen so far. And from my experience, I can't imagine the National Guard are going to take it lying down. Right, as you can see, the barricades have definitely grown in size. When we first got here, they were just bags of rubbish, and now they're practically building a wall. There's another one down there, about 200 meters. Protesters are getting excited, and the stones are starting to throw, and it's probably only a matter of time before gas comes back. First wave of tear gas just came past. They were firing it at head height. The world may be looking at Ukraine right now, but this is what's happening in Venezuela. This is surreal. The National Guard have just dropped a lot of tear gas onto the protesters, and now they're dropping some Venezuelan pop music. I love Venezuelan pop music.
night fell, the National Guard arrived in the square, and local residents shouted warnings to the protesters. I counted more than 60 motorcycles combing the area, but by that time the protesters had fled. Eventually the guards left too, to the sound of banging pots.
All three pieces are very nicely shot.
You've got to thank the people who carry the cameras.
Whoa, no, because I've seen those stories told various different ways, but pieces are very nicely shot. Again, I'm going to ask the same question I asked Aris. The context stuff. You're showing us these pieces because visually they're the most arresting. I suspect they're probably, of the series that you perhaps did out of Venezuela, this might have clocked up the highest number of hits as well. But
that was quite a lot. It was quite a gassy trip.
Yeah. Were you able to put out a dispatch on some of the causal side of this, and everyone trying, because one of the big parts of the story is trying to figure out how much of this is in fact just organic, how much of it has been puppet mastered from Washington and elsewhere?
Well, it's something, that's the kind of thing that in the dispatches at least came up when you'd spend time with Chavistas.
Yeah.
But to be honest, the dispatches themselves tend to be the things that we got from the street, whether they were turning up at the anniversary of Chavez's death, so you're talking to kind of real hardline Chavistas, or you're at the protests and you're speaking to people who are saying that this is organic and this is a kind of true revolution. But that's why it's significant that we have the freedom to be cutting these things, because cutting an interview at night when you've just done that as well, so you can file it the next day. It's harder than cutting this stuff, So what we're doing with the dispatches is bringing the kind of the day-to-day kind of news updates, tweets as it were, and then, as I say, we're going to release a kind of half hour which has all of our sit-down interviews and our in-depth focus on it.
Any questions on this as well? Get your hands up, because I just have one more point really on this before we get to the question. That is that, I love that little bit where you can see them digging in and getting ready for the demo, and you see how they get geared up and how they build the barriers. And I couldn't help but think, having worked for a mainstream news organization on stories of ongoing protests before, a different generation. It might have been, Belgrade in 1999 as opposed to this now. But that's the kind of detail that I could never see because I was always tied to a live location at that time.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, the fact that you don't have to feed the live beast, do you even realize how much of a break that is?
I probably don't.
I
probably don't, but what I've got to say is if the Wi-Fi wasn't so crap in Caracas, that would have been live. Yeah. Because live streaming's a big, exciting thing for us. And as I say, it's something we did manage to pull off there, but only after kind of making friends and being able to plug into a hard wire and filming from a building above while I'm down on the floor, basically commentating in riot gear, which was the single most exhausting thing I've ever done.
Where's the question coming from? It's coming from here.
Just
Name,
here.
please.
Yeah, my name's Navdeep. Make documentaries independently here and there. Kind of agree. It kept popping into my head over and over again. What you were saying, kind of about the context.
Microphone closer to the mouth.
Hello. Yeah, context. I saw a lot of fireworks, like you were saying. Good reportage, brilliant. Get them out there, get the reporters out there, ace. But I'm always interested in context. We don't get that ever. It's easy to see that on the BBC, on Channel 4. You see lots of fireworks every day. You never get geopolitical context, and also you don't get an idea of who you're funded by and what their context is. We all know it's about that to an extent. So I don't know, like you mentioned Rupert Murdoch, I don't know how that actually really affects.
Wait, so you want context of how we're funded in a story about Venezuela?
No. I want context for the stories that you're doing.
Okay, no, I mean, but it's merely
geopolitical context.
It's the same point to make again. I mean, you're watching one small fragment of daily updates, and as I say, we will produce. It's coming out probably in the next couple of weeks. Like a thoughtful one with sit-down interviews with leaders of the opposition, members of the government, that kind of thing. And that's where the context comes in. And I don't think it's fair to say that we don't deliver context. I think Milen's film that we saw a clip of was a great example of really kind of
Well,
setting
that was interesting. That
context.
was cultural kind of context. Yeah, I'm talking about geopolitical context really more. I think that's where I'm coming from here.
You got to remember you're dealing with a geeky room full of journalists. That those three as a selection, you know, if you just showed it to a room full of your target audience, which is probably fair to say, you know, your target
No, I
audience
think these guys are our target
be,
audience.
Might be, I don't. You mightn't hear the context question, but you're going to get it from geeks like us because that's what we miss, not just on these three pieces, to a lesser extent in Milan's, because we haven't seen the other dispatches.
Yeah.
But that's what I think I, as a journalist, crave, and others do.
Absolutely, but that's where, as Alex, just to say the point again, our longer form reports, if you look at Vice News and you look at, I mean, I just went to Thailand to do a long form report on the crisis there. Like, it's a very long process of talking to a lot of people to not just rehash what you see in every other media outlet, but to actually find real information on the ground from people you talk to and then turn that into context that people understand. And we do those things and we turn them over pretty quickly and they're on our website.
So check them out. Microphone in the back corner, please.
Hi, Jasper Jackson from the Media Briefing. So Vice has had a lot of success and made a lot of money out of sponsored channels, sponsored content. A, can you ever see that working with something like Vice News, which is hard, important stories that are often controversial? And if not, what role does Vice News play in a company which is ultimately set up to make money out of advertising?
Well, I think with Vice News, as I said earlier, we're lucky enough to have a kind of suite of, or not lucky enough, I don't know, Shane's intelligent enough, to have a kind of suite of channels, some of which, sit much more comfortably with corporate sponsorship than news would. I think right now, what we're really driven with news is just getting more people to watch it, just getting more, kind of eyes on our work. I'm sure we can find ways to kind of work with various organisations about maybe projects about the environment or something like that. But you're right, it is a bit more of a kind of complex thing. But Vice is a very large organisation, and when you watch Channel 4, the advert breaks in Channel 4 News are very short because they make their money elsewhere.
But they make all their money from those ad breaks because it's TV. You're online and you don't make as much money out of online ads normally.
No, I mean we have an entirely different funding system. But my point is that you don't get the new Nike 5-minute football advert playing in between Jon Snow and Christian.
Just on that really quickly, your relationship with mainstream media. Vice has hooked up in the past, jumped into bed at least temporarily with CNN on one prolonged occasion.
That's true. And the
casual
BBC,
casual relationship.
Yeah, we're cool young guys. We don't we don't get tied down.
MTV, I don't think that was an exclusive relationship, but you were in with them for a while.
For a bit.
I don't know where you are on the HBO thing, which was probably your most ambitious, I think, show to show.
Yeah, well, I think we're nearing the end of season 2.
So that's an ongoing relationship. I'm wondering, what, in the case of MTV and BBC, and you guys may not know this, but I'm just curious about it. Why did those deals go away? How much of the differences at the end that meant that you couldn't renew would have come down to just the deal, the players? How much of it do you think was cultural between a new kind of news organization and what people like to call, in a fairly foreboding way, legacy media?
Personally, I think it's simply that as an organisation, we grow and transform in a minute-by-minute basis. I've been there about 5 years. I reckon I've had about 15 different jobs.
Yeah.
But and I think that sometimes we outgrow some deals. Things move on. Things progress, and it's I don't think we've ever left one of your casual relationships, as you say, with bad blood.
Yeah.
But you move on, and HBO is not a bad place to be right now.
I'm okay with HBO. I don't know where the microphone is. Millicent makes the calls. We're going to take a couple more questions. We're going to break this at 8:10, and I think we want to bring people back at around 8:40, if that's okay. All right. So we're going to end this at 8:10, and then Millicent will tell us what to do. She always does. Where's the question? Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Hazel Pfeiffer. I work for CNN with Jill. I'm just curious. You guys are famous for doing some very left field stuff, like ghost rapes of Bolivia and paintballing with Hezbollah. So I'm just curious, are there any news stories that you come across that you go, no way, that's too out there even for us?
Crap ones. I don't know. I mean, yeah, occasionally, because when it was our 10th anniversary in the UK, we printed a list of here's 50 stories you can never ever fucking pitch to us ever again. And number one was just the most crazy and stupid one, which was an intern we had who once pitched that we murder somebody. I thought that would be pushing the envelope too far. Call me conservative. But no, of course, I mean, the thing is, you know, to talk on a kind of...
But where's the intern now? That's the question.
She could be here. I think from a news thing, I think that, yeah, okay, I mean, you say we do what? Ghost Rates of Bolivia, I don't think was a wild thing. I think it was a very sad and very somber piece about a kind of awful tragedy in a marginal community. But I think with news, yeah, you get a lot of people who mistake our energy for bombast, and they come along and think that we'll be the people who'll pay for them to do the stupid thing the BBC didn't have the balls to. And actually, we all know there are some people out there with a bloody death wish, and we don't want to get into bed with them at all. So you have to be very, very serious when you're thinking about these things.
Another question? So there's one here. Hi.
Sorry.
Yes, I suppose the point of context have been made already, but I have to say, you know, I cover Venezuela, that's my part of the world, and the reflection I was having when watching this, which is an amazing piece of action, you know, and very beautifully shot, and I think, you know, very good journalism from that point of view. But I think, you know, I was kind of reflecting on the idea of information or misinformation when you don't place things in context.
Mm-hmm.
And I really believe that in the Venezuelan case, I wasn't sure whether that piece was really misinforming me rather than informing me. So I think that this is something that was kind of, you know, I was reflecting on whether you can actually, in certain circumstances, just take a clip, a piece of action out there and place it out there without putting it in context. Are you really informing?
Okay, it's a fair point. As I getting bored of saying this, but as I said, this is part of a kind of long suite of films that were coming out daily. So in that way, it was part of a kind of larger context. I mean, ultimately, what we do make is we have a particular style, and it can be quite subjective. So I went that day to an enormous rally in the centre of town, which you saw. Then I left, and someone said, "Go to Altamira Square," because that's where some people are going. So I went. I got to Altamira Square. I saw that some things were different from the day before, which I do mention in my piece to the camera, but perhaps makes more sense if you've seen it before. I noticed that they're taking things down. I noticed that they're stepping things up. And then I show how it kind of plays out. And yeah, it's quick journalism, and perhaps it's, you know, I mean, you know, if I'd sat on it for a week, I'm sure I would have made something much more beautiful. But that's what I saw. That's what happened. And I don't see how that can be misinformed.
And format is problematic, whether you're in a media organization or whether you're at a media club trying to put together a session like this to try to give people a taste. And what I would suggest, you know, for perfectly valid questions such as your own, valid because it was just like mine, I think you need to just sit and look at what Alex put out that week. And you need to look at it, I think, in that light. Because, you know, when the BBC or when CNN goes in there, they're doing a piece that runs 2:15 if we're lucky. Otherwise, it's 1:45, and you can't tell me there's much more context in that either. So I think you have to look at the body of work. We're at a bit of a disadvantage here because we're not going to show all of the dispatches from either Eris or for Alex. But I would ask you, if you're really interested in the organization in a critical way, go to their site and see exactly what he did that week, and then find him and beat him if you're not happy. Where's the mic? I think that this is our last question.
Is it on? Okay, hi. Hi, I'm Laura Kramer from Clover Films.
Hi.
Hello. I'm just wondering, going forward as Vice is growing, what do you see your relationship? Obviously, you have a lot of internal people who work for Vice, who are going out doing stories that they're passionate about. What do you see your relationship going forward with freelance journalists and possibly even production houses?
Well, as far as production houses go, yeah, okay, occasionally something might be commissioned out of house, but no. I mean, we want to make our stories, we want to own our stories, we want everything we make to be Vice. Otherwise, what's the point? The second that an organization lets other people do the work for them, there's no fucking reason for them to exist anymore.
Even if it's an exclusive.
I mean, okay, no, sometimes things are brought to us and we'll work with them, but we'd still like to be cutting it and working with the filmmakers ourselves. As far as freelancers go, they're really, really, really important.
We speak to them every day. We love people pitching ideas if they're good. This is the really exciting thing with Vice News. Young people with ideas can come to us, and if they're good and if they actually know what they're talking about and they're driven, they will be given an opportunity.
And Aris won an award as a freelancer for us months ago.
Yeah, I came to Vice as a freelancer. I did films for Vice in Sudan and then Mali as a freelancer, print as well. And eventually I was taken on board. I mean, one thing we're very proud about commissioning a lot of freelance content in print, especially. There's a lot of freelance talent in print and photography, which we use and we're very proud to use. But in terms of film, yeah, I mean, we make really, really good stuff. So.
As I wrap this up, because we're going to get to the next session half an hour from now, I just have one more question for you guys. Are there any men on Vice News on the air with no facial hair? Can you name me one?
I used to have no facial hair.
Yeah, but you wanted to get on the air, now you have facial hair.
I look back at a film I made without facial hair the other day. I look like some kind of awful balding child.
We may invite the Vice people back one day. We can do more on facial hair and style. I want to thank Milan, Alex, and Eris for your films, first of all, your journalism, and for being here to talk about this. We're back here in half an hour for the second panel.
Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Now that we've had the session with Vice, we're moving on to our second panel. It's a more clean-shaven panel, although we do have some stubble from the Vice person on. So we're here to discuss the changing news landscape. Quickly, by way of introduction, Richard Sambrook, who I've dealt with many times before on panels such as these, former director of global news at the BBC. More than 30 years in journalism, well placed to talk about the changing news landscape. Kevin Sutcliffe, who's the Vice Head of News Operation for Europe, former editor of Channel 4's Dispatches. And I am going to ask him about that move. Richard James, the news editor of BuzzFeed UK, previously deputy online editor at Metro. Prior to that, technology editor at Metro. Also worked at the Daily Mail online. And he tells me there isn't a huge Daily Mail diaspora at BuzzFeed. Tom Giles, editor of the BBC Current Affairs program Panorama. Been with the BBC since 1991, World Service Radio. We've got some people who are mainstream media people primarily, and Richard Sambrook, Tom, and myself. In Kevin and Richard, we have 3 Richards on the panel, not helpful. That's Millicent's organizational failing. 2 people who've come out of mainstream/legacy media organizations and now find themselves on the new media side. So I think very well placed to talk about the changing news landscape. So, Kevin, why don't we start with you? Did you go straight from Channel 4 to Vice, or was there somewhere in between? And just talk about that decision.
Well, I've been at Channel 4 for 9 years. Range of factual programming from editing Dispatches, Unreported World, 10 o'clock live, a slightly odd late night political chat show. And I just thought I fancied a change, so I stopped. And I just stopped for a year and just decided to have a rest because it's 24/7, 9 years of 24/7, being on call, working with people like Sean. Where's Sean? He's here today, Langan. People in the audience who are Al Jazz, people, work with lots of people. So I just decided to have a year off and ponder.
Are you, the fact that you ended up at Vice and not with another more conventional mainstream media organization, are you evidence, sort of strategic evidence, of the changing news landscape?
I think I'm evidence that I think Vice is a fantastic opportunity for me. I think it's amazing. Just, I've always read Vice, I've always gone to the website. It's been one of my places of choice to find out about the world and different views. So I come out of magazines, I come out of the 80s and The Face and sort of magazines. So Vice is sort of a fit for me. And actually, Vice's journalism, in a way, as a fit for some of the things and my attitudes at Channel 4. So it didn't feel like much of a massive leap for me. I think attitudinally there's quite a lot that I felt at home in, and I felt the attitudes and the views you heard before from Alex Miller and Aris. I just, I felt when I got there, wow, this is I feel at home. So it felt very comfortable.
And energizing.
Yeah, and I grew a beard.
Yeah. You're working on it.
No, I had a beard.
You're not there yet.
This is the after.
Richards, Tom, I'm just wondering, for those of you who were here for the previous session, talk to us a little bit about what you took from that session, some of the Vice content that you saw, where it may fit in the changing news landscape or not, as...
Okay, so I mean, just briefly, Richard. I think it's I'm a big fan, big supporter. Actually, BuzzFeed as well, for reasons I'll explain in a minute. I think there is a little bit of myth about it because Vice have employed some very experienced people. A lot of that material could sit on a terrestrial channel. If you look at some of BBC Three current affairs before it disappears completely, Our World, Our War, and so on, very similar in style. So, but the fact that there is a new style of journalism, a new attitude and flavour that a different demographic feels it loyal to and owns in a way that it struggles to with legacy media is a great thing. First point. Second point, I think it's great that you're getting online organisations that are then able to migrate into traditional media, so Vice's partnerships with TV and so that's a great thing. The fact that BuzzFeed can build an audience through listicles and Vice through entertainment and then invest back into serious news is a great thing. The tabloid press has been doing that since the 60s or probably the 50s, so there's nothing kind of new about that, but here's a new model and a new expression of that. That's all good. The buts, the caveats, because there's got to be one, otherwise we haven't got a discussion other than to say how wonderful they all are. I think Alan Rusbridger at a conference recently, you were there as well, Richard, said that BuzzFeed and Vice are about 3 minutes old and their crises are yet to come. And I think that's true to a degree. And I think the true nature of an organisation comes through in how it handles crises, whether that's an economic business crisis, whether, Vice has had Simon kidnapped for a few days or whatever, there will be worse than that to come probably. And Al Jazeera's going through it at the minute. How organisations respond when they're really under pressure and really at that point is a crucible or that makes or breaks them, and that's yet to come. But good luck to them. They're making the running. They're having a great time. They're taking turf. Fantastic.
At the risk of me repeating myself, yeah, BBC Three does some of the things that Vice does, and BBC and Britain is now a target market for this organisation. But again, to belabor the point, in North America, nobody's doing this. No one's producing this kind of video. Every once in a while you might see something on PBS. It doesn't have the kind of reach, doesn't have the kind of vibe, doesn't have the kind of demographic. So again, in this country...
Well, you're trying to do it with AJ+, but...
Yeah, no, but I've lived in this country for 20 years. I hear Brits moan about their media all the time. I think it's healthy to do. But believe me, it gets worse than what you have here. It's where I come from. Tom?
Yeah, I found it obviously energizing, strangely familiar in some ways. I'm not here to provide buts. I take the crisis point completely. We're an expert in the BBC at crises, and clearly, in some ways, I suppose it's at what point does the critique emerge? Because you've risen so far, so fast. You're becoming such a sort of zeitgeist. There's a certain amount of hype. You can feel there's people around already sort of looking to sort of poke holes here and there. It is exactly how you respond to that and where that's going to come from. But I mean, in a way, that doesn't really matter. In terms of the BBC Three, BBC Three will still go on online. I don't know how that's going to work, but I can't imagine they're not going to turn to people like Vice and want to know how they can inform that whole online younger audience landscape. But I didn't feel looking at it, the material I saw. I would make the point as well that we've had Ben Anderson, for example, who's here tonight, who's done a lot of fantastic stuff for Vice. He was doing fantastic stuff for Panorama, and then Vice gave him more money. And that's the new world that I'm backing all the way. But in a way, that's what I mean. What I wanted Ben to do for us, which he did fantastically well, the spirit of that is what Vice thrive off as well. So in a funny way, we're all part of the same. We're all looking for that. All the stuff about the analysis and the context that people at the BBC are supposed to deliver in spades. Well, yeah, that's fine. But in the end, that's no substitute for not going out there and finding things and taking risks. And Ben was doing that for us. And people like Ben, like some of the other reporters, they naturally provide some of that analysis and context by being there and just telling it to people. I mean, I'm not going to knock anything they're doing in that regard because it's obviously incredibly important. But yeah, let's see when all the criticisms start raining about what you're not doing. The Murdoch thing I think is interesting because it does run slightly against their overall branding. How do they deal with that when those sort of criticisms start coming at them?
Yeah, I think it's fantastic. I mean, these are clearly stories that need to be told. I mean, the fact that the younger audience are going to places like Vice to find them and to share them when they may not necessarily share a BBC story or a Sky News story can only be a good thing. I think it's great to see that kind of, in a way, the kind of doom and gloom in a way is kind of lifted in a way, and that people are seeing that investments can bring the returns, so they're investing, great journalists are going to Vice, to BuzzFeed, and the stories that they're creating are finding the right audience, and people are they're craving it. They want to know the story. They want to cut through the crap. They want to see what's going on, and I think somewhere like Vice is doing it really, really well at the moment.
Do we even know yet whether the Vice model is sustainable? Because we know that Murdoch threw a lot of money in there. I don't know if that's because he believed in it, whether he wanted the youth demographic, whether he was looking for street cred and had 70 million to kick around. I do know that, and I think with sort of old war horses like myself, when I see I was at South by Southwest recently at the Interactive Festival. The Onion did a great little piece on South by Southwest Interactive where they said, organizers of South by Southwest have said that the term innovative has been used 640,000 times during the first 3 days. At this rate, before the Interactive Festival is complete, it will be used, they predict 1.2 million times and 800,000 for game changer. Two terms that have yet to be used here are, that have yet to be heard at South by Southwest are economic model and business viability. And one of the questions that I have for Vice on the money side comes from the fact that Shane Smith has told some tall tales about the early days of the organization, about its history, about and maybe they didn't think they were going to become a news organization, but he's said a lot of stuff that just wasn't true. And part of that was him having fun with mainstream media, asking the same questions all the time about this organization. He got bored and he started to tell some truth stretchers. And so now trying to get a feel for when you say 35 overseas bureaus, X number of people, I kind of think that some of the stuff that Shane said in the past has kind of come back, and there are some doubts out there, and I detect some sort of dubiousness amongst some people who are yet to be convinced of the economic model. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I think it's just worth remembering that this is still in beta. It's a baby as a news vertical. It's 10 weeks old. So this is like, I think people should see that. It's really an amazing start for us. And we've grown that very quickly, and we're still finding our way. And some of the comments in the earlier session were really interesting about what are you going to do about Washington politics? We're finding our way. We haven't got the answer. What we've got is a start, and I think we've got a good start for that. And I really think we can build on that, and we're listening. We're really in listening mode. We're in beta mode. So I think that's definitely the first thing to say about the whole operation. So, as that grows and we try and understand and feel our way to what our audience is telling us, what the clicks are telling us, I think that the thing will change. It will move on. There's a lot of analysis going on now from the start 10 weeks ago to where we are now. What have we learned? So in a massive piece of listening and learning about how this goes, because, it's all virgin territory to us. We're just finding our way. So I think it's worth seeing it in that context. That's not a defensive thing. That's how it is. And I think we've shown you some stuff we've been trying to do. We're listening. People are talking to us about, well, you're not that original. Lots of people do that. Well, yeah, sure. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We're doing good content. We are spending money on that content. We are reaching around the world. We are opening bureau. We have got reach. We do think it's an opportunity to try and grow a network, and a network that works. A network that doesn't necessarily have to take its model from, if you want, legacy media. It doesn't have to be massively invested. It doesn't have to have huge buildings in central London with massive basements and millions of people. You know, it can be quicker, fleet of foot. It can be a different model. Does that work financially? Well, we're still finding that out too, because news notoriously is a hard thing to monetize, and we're working on that too. The point I think is worth remembering about Murdoch, which seems to be shouted extremely loudly,
especially in this town,
particularly in this town, is that it's a very modest investment, and it's not about the news. It's across Vice. It's into Vice in general. Vice is an enormous global enterprise. It's got entertainment. It's got television. It's growing, and it looked for some investment. It has other investment too, which is it's got investment from WPP. So these things are small investments, and I think they're sort of getting in the way of the bigger discussion, which is this is a sort of fantastic growing enterprise, but it is still finding its way.
Any questions from the floor? We'll get the mic out there. I'm just going to throw one more question at Richard as the mic makes the rounds. You're at BuzzFeed.
Yep.
You came out of a print background and a web on print. When you arrived there as another sort of exhibit 47C of the changing news landscape, and you arrive at a place like BuzzFeed, which has got incredible amount of momentum right now. How do they see you? How do you see them? Just tell me a little bit about the cultural shift that goes on when you walk through out the doors of the Daily Mail or the Metro and walk into a place like that.
It's fantastic. It's like a breath of fresh air. It's there's so much more freedom. There's so much more creativity. There's not. I think they were talking about in the previous session the area that places like BuzzFeed and Vice can occupy in not chasing the daily news agenda necessarily, and having that freedom to skirt around the edges and to break down the main story of the day, whatever's trending on the week, and actually do the explainer, do the debunker, and properly tell the story, which is what people are essentially after, instead of just following the herd in a way and just keep on churning it all out. So that's hugely refreshing. I think the investments that's going on there at the moment as well, and bringing people to bring in from the Guardian and places, and they've got people out in Ukraine and Syria and Nairobi and stuff. It's just a hugely exciting time to be there. And I think just in the way the tide, not tide's turning, but the changing landscape is one of the most exciting places to be right now.
And BuzzFeed has only recently opened in the UK, headquartered in New York.
Yeah, I think we had a 1 year anniversary last week or something, so we're very new.
Richard, Tom, feel free to ask these changing news landscape guys any questions that I haven't got to. Do you have any questions from the floor? We have one here.
In the last panel, it was pointed out context. I feel that one of the things that's changing a lot is the point of view. Vice journalists take the camera off the tripod. I see very little static reporting, which is what BBC sometimes feels quite stifled for. And in some ways, some examples of gonzo journalism, I feel, are coming a comeback. While Al Jazeera, I feel, is going the opposite way, actually, is becoming increasingly stifled. I'm asking, does new young journalism mean also a comeback for more gonzo-ish passionate journalism? And if that's the case, what is the place for? Can the BBC even ever hope to attract a younger audience?
Are you working with gonzo?
Is that from Sesame Street?
No.
I like passion with journalism, and I think I work with passionate journalists, and I think that they are showing a street view of the world. Alex found his way around Venezuela in a series of dispatches that told me more about Venezuela in 5-minute items than I'd learnt from a two-way, from a live, above a riot, or the standard formats that are used. And obviously we are, I think, benefiting from having that different approach. And it's a much more street level. You might call it more relaxed. You might call it gonzo. I don't particularly like gonzo as a way of explaining it. I think it's involved, it's embedded, it's responsive, it's got an emotional connection between the reporter and the people who are consuming it. I think that those things are what make it feel fresh, and feel it less mediated, less managed, less part of a corporate enterprise, which a lot of the news now feels like it's part of corporate enterprise.
Yeah, I mean, I take all that, Kevin, and it's also about moments. It's about finding those moments and capturing, but CBS was doing moments 20, 30 years ago and moved away from it. We've been through Gonzo and come back to it. It is fantastically engaging. It's partly informed by UGC and citizen journalism and street level and all that. So, absolutely, that's great. But at some stage, you're 3 minutes old, so it's fine. But at some stage, there's got to be more than those tricks, isn't there?
I don't think they're tricks. I think that it's a.
I didn't mean that disparagingly.
No, but it's a journalistic approach. I think that in the round, we've got an editorial side to this as well, where we've got a huge amount. We're posting written work as well, photography, as well as the video. And at the moment, I think that the video approach of our journalists feels fresh, feels that you're getting to the heart of things, and you're seeing a reaction from people, that journalists are not reporting for the BBC or Al Jazeera. They are also people.
But
it's very important.
You can be sure that the BBC and Al Jazeera are watching very closely and working out how they can try and.
That's what I'm doing here.
Yeah. But
that's what we're all doing. They don't pay me.
Yeah.
They don't pay me. Just on that one point, Richard. Yes, CBS did that 30 years ago.
Yeah.
These days, Vice says it has 35 overseas bureaus.
Yeah.
CBS has 4.
Yeah, sure.
So what they did and what they're doing are two different things. And maybe they're stepping in and filling in a void.
Yeah.
And there's a little more morally safer there than our bearded front people would make us believe.
And look, these things move all the time. This is, I mean, this is 30 years. This almost to the moment since Mike Burke in Ethiopia, which is the world's most watched news report. 500 million people in 24 hours saw that huge impact. If you look at it now, as I've been doing for academic historic reasons, it's very much of its time. It's distanced. It's observational. It's a white judgment on a black problem. It's all sorts of things you couldn't do today. Since then, we've moved through more emotive reporting, we've moved through all sorts of different styles, and now we're getting back to, however you want to describe it, but a more engaged, street level, bringing the audience right into the moment style of reporting, which is very exciting, but that will start to influence all sorts of other people, and then it'll start to move on again.
But technology's changed in those things.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, that's slightly more the point. I mean, the point I should also make is, in the way we would approach, say, Ukraine, at any one moment, we're tweeting, we're putting things out on Vine, Instagram, we're posting a long form, we're posting dispatches, we're posting from two different places. That's so, in a way, this sort of, partly the form is interesting, but also the general overall approach should now be seen as very different from those approaches. I mean, there were how many channels 30 years ago? 4 channels and Michael Burke. The impact was enormous.
And no 24-hour news channels.
Yeah.
Tom, I'm wondering when you look at that stuff, because what strikes me about some of the Vice material was the visual quality. I mean, it's quite nice, and it looks it could be panorama, but what you're not getting is really you're getting proximity, access. You're getting a little bit of voyeurism, but you're not really getting the investigative stuff that a program like yours.
Well, some of that flows out from it naturally anyway. It doesn't have to have a big capital I saying investigation. And I think, as I was saying, that some of the stuff that we try and aspire to do, can just go for that sort of access, that sort of reportage, and bring with it a sense of investigation. Obviously, right now in the Ukraine, we're out there trying to sort of get in with different groups and try and prove the links to Moscow or not, in the same way that Vice would do. They can just get it out. In a terrible way, we're sort of prisoners of our form. The forms that you're talking about, the reason it feels liberating is because you don't have to worry about, how's that going to fit on this channel or that channel, or how's that going to get marketed at 8:30 on BBC One, or is it going to work as an hour at 9 o'clock? And those decisions are like super tankers, sort of going remarkably slowly and backwards at times into some tiny little port. Whereas you guys just have, by the time we've finally got the permission to go out there and get the money and get the commission and get it in, you've gone out there and done it anyway and put it out in a completely new form, in a completely new landscape. And what you're doing is filling the void that in many ways digital fragmentation is what is really scaring, what you might call legacy media. if you're on a normal legacy channel, I don't know if that's how you'd put it, like BBC One, where I am, you are looking inevitably at declining audiences. Yeah, there'll be things that change that. There'll be moments of dreadfulness. John Sweeney will go to North Korea and lots of people will watch for all the wrong reasons. Not that they did us any good. Apart from those little moments that we can create, the general shift is away from people coming. The mass audience of those sort of forms, and you've basically. You don't have those kind of constrictions. You don't have those restrictions, and that's fantastic. It's just at what moment everyone else, other people pop up to do the same thing, and where the competition starts and when it really starts to crunch. I don't know why I keep throwing forward to a much grimmer future, but it's something of my training. But
I think we have. Do you want to go ahead?
I was wondering, what is the company policy towards freelancers in the event that somebody is killed or kidnapped in the field? So
You're talking about Vice here?
Yeah. So you have a freelancer in Syria who's producing maybe their first story, second story for Vice, and they disappear. What does the company feel? What is the company's policy towards freelancers? And put that in the context of the Wall Street Journal has a contract for videographers, photographers, which is they have zero responsibility towards freelancers under any circumstances for any reasons.
Yeah, so anybody who works for Vice News is insured. So that's the first thing. So you're effectively, whether you're a freelancer or whether you're working on staff, you're treated as an insured person working for Vice News. We've got a fully compliant risk policy, which the BBC would recognise. Channel 4 certainly recognised because I brought it with me. Before when I came, actually Vice had a very, very strong policy in place about how it treats both its staff and its freelancers. So, it's one of the easy, I think, softer things to try and say about a place that uses a large amount of freelancers is you treat it like a newspaper, off you go, jolly good, come back when you've got something. We don't work like that, so we'll never say to someone, not quite sure about that serious story, show us it when you come back, for example. We won't be doing that. So we take it very, very seriously. We've obviously had a small kidnap incident recently that started off a whole chain of our systems, which happily was resolved quite quickly. So all of that's in place. And I think as any organisation that wishes to be taken seriously needs to be able to show that when it's put to test like that, it has robust systems, which we have.
But there have been limitations on that. Like you have journalists who are missing in Syria who were active freelancers.
I don't.
No, you don't. But I'm saying, I think it's a very serious sort of question. You have, people in general within journalism. It's a very serious issue. So, is there a limitation on it? Because some of the best publications in the world.
I don't understand what you mean.
So you have somebody who you've worked with for not a very long period of time, and they go missing.
Yeah.
Are you going to care? Are you going to stay on top of it for 1 year, for 2 years?
If somebody's working for us, then they're our responsibility. And I've got obviously a longer track record, and I've been through most extreme events that happen to journalists. So I bring that experience to Vice, but also that application for Vice. So I'd say that.
Simon Ostrovsky, is he staff or freelance?
He's on staff in New York.
Well, it doesn't go directly to your question, but
it sort of doesn't matter.
Nor should it. We have a question over here.
Yes, it's Juliana, your colleague from Al Jazeera.
Yes.
We've heard a lot about the incredible freedom that there is at Vice and how people can take decisions very quickly and go and get budgets to fly to different places. But what is the editorial policy? What is your communication with your bosses? Is there a vision? What's coming down towards you, and what are you feeding on towards the people that you work with?
Well, I think what you see is what you get. I think we think we tell stories that matter, where we've got something to say about a story. I think have defined ourselves as not wanting to be 24-hour rolling news, reacting to everything, filling for hours on end when there's nothing to say about a plane crash. We want to tell stories that people aren't going to tell, so there's a bit of the unreported world about it. There are our takes on things that are important, I think, and we think that the audience who are consuming us, and up to 130 million eyeballs a month across the Vice channels, says that people like what we do. We're trying to sort of understand what they want, because I think part of this conversation is also moving forward is you're going to live or die by the knowledge of your audience and what you know about your audience and how you can serve that audience and what that audience wants from you, and that's really important.
Can I ask a question? I'm very interested to know how you actually know what your audience wants, because obviously in television we spend our lives trying to work out what the audience wants.
Traffic, clicks, traffic, what they say underneath the stuff, how much they share.
And how far does that drive your commissioning?
I think we do things that are important, and as I can only go by what I also did at Channel 4, if a story is important and you think it should be told, then we'll do it. And some shows are going to, in old terms, rate, and some shows are going to win you an award, and some shows you're just proud that you did them, and you should just stand by your journalism. And there are things this year, I hope, I'll say, probably didn't traffic very much. Some of the serious stuff we do, which, by the end of the year this year, I would like to think, what did we get known for? Well, we got known for doing Ukraine incredibly intensively from different angles. That's something we should be known for by the end of the year. Syria, we've done several very strong pieces that have been both about what it's like to be inside Syria. We've got something coming up. So again, what are we known for? The bravery of our journalism is important. The traffic is important. Of course, we want people to see the stuff, but also that we have standout pieces where people go, only Vice News would do that.
Just a quick question for Richard. I suppose that the Daily Mail, the ultimate Daily Mail story in the theoretical world, would have had something to do with an undocumented alien doing something terrible to a member of the royal family. What is the perfect BuzzFeed story?
Well, it depends.
Well, just give us an idea of, because you become not only do you move into this organization, but now you're a news editor there. So you're making calls that are presumably informed by the culture of a place that you've just jumped into.
Sure.
So I'm trying to get my head around that, so help me with that.
Well, we also have an extremely good knowledge of what the audience wants. We have unbelievable CMS in terms of...
CMS?
Yeah, in terms of...
What does that mean?
what we build the stories in. And we have a viral dashboard built within it, so we know how stories are going, we know social uplift, we know where people are coming from, we know where they're going to, and it's hugely impressive. And so we can keep track of all stories in a very, very minute manner, which is wonderful, because we know where they're coming from, why they're...
And how big a component is the comment section within that?
The comment section?
Yeah.
I don't think very...
Really?
No, not really. Yeah. So the perfect BuzzFeed story...
Yeah, what's the ultimate BuzzFeed story?
Well, it could be anything from something completely silly to something... In the moment, we're doing a lot on the explainer stuff. As I say, the debunking stuff. We're also going for the long-form stuff. So I guess it's just
debunking what? Like Ukraine, Western media narrative on Ukraine?
Yeah, just anything. Whatever the main story of theme of the day, the week, the month is.
So what does that tell you?
Just cutting through all the chatter.
What does it tell you that your debunking features do so well compared to your other stuff? What are people out there looking for?
They're looking for a bit of clarity, I think. I think in, the Twitter world where it's just a constant stream of endless opinion, I think people just would like to know, just to break it through it and go, well, this is the story, these are the facts, this is the conclusion. Instead, and just all the noise that's never ending with the 24-hour news of Twitter that never stops. I think people just like a bit of clarity of bang, this is it, this is the thing you need to know about X, and here it is, and now share it.
Audience, where's the microphone? Where is it living? There we are. I have a question here.
Hi there, Jonathan Heath from GQ. It's interesting, I grew up with reading Vice, and what I knew it for was this kind of sense of I mean, you looked at the people that you thought work at that magazine, and there was just like a load of guys doing drugs, having a good time. And do you worry, in a sense, that the bigger you get, and the more you invite kind of attraction from various traditional news corporations, that the spirit of Vice will be lost? And that's what I think people come to your news site for. They get to see news stories, but they want to see it through a different prism, which is that prism of Vice, which is, a prism of youth, basically. And is that something you have to worry about?
Are you asking me about whether we take drugs?
Yes.
No, the funny thing about Shane Smith, Shane often talks about drinking in Afghanistan. He never mentions drugs. Nobody goes to Afghanistan for the alcohol. That's just my take from that story. And he never mentions it. Go ahead.
You just have to, really watch and see. I think that the news is the spirit of Vice. I really do think it is. And I think I go back to, we've just started, but you've heard from some of the reporters this previous session, and I think you get the sense that's Vice. It's voices, it's views, it's attitudes that feel very much the spirit of Vice, and it come out of the history of Vice. I think they absolutely, you can see where if you want, the heritage is. But also bear in mind, Vice is changing. Vice is becoming a big organisation with different verticals offering very different sorts of entertainment, food, all these other things as well. So as an entity, it changes as well. It will change from the magazine that started so long ago in Canada to now. But I think the attitude and the spirit is absolutely there. And I think you come to the Vice office and you'd feel that people instinctively have that. They ask, does that feel Vice? It's one of those things you do, you feel it. And I think that's very strong. And it's also very important, because that's the difference. That's what we are selling, the difference.
Richard, I was wondering whether you had any point on Richard James's point about the debunking and what people are looking for. Or maybe you have another point.
Well, I'll come to that in a minute. But I think that the interesting thing is a lot of what we're talking about here is kind of casting forward to saying, how is this going to mature? And of course, it's unfair because it's just establishing itself in terms of news, obviously not in terms of the magazine. And it's fantastic that it's found an audience because of its tone of voice and its attitude and so on. But how that matures over a period of time, I think there will be issues. And you mentioned Rolling Stone. I don't read Rolling Stone anymore because it's kind of dull now. It hasn't matured particularly well in my view. But you may disagree.
Well,
but there will
General McChrystal doesn't think it's matured very well.
No, that's true. Yeah, okay, but that's
He wishes they.
That's one off. Okay, but I think there are there are going to be issues about how it matures, and one of the issues, all of the the traditional media is obsessed with trust. How do we get trust? How do we get who to trust us? And the funding model, sponsor. Do you really clear what's sponsored, what is, and all of those issues are going to be ones that you're going to have to deal with, at some stage in the future, I think. And these are problems, some way off yet, but they're coming at you in the near future. I mean, the debunking thing, that basically all audiences and readerships want the same thing. They want to know something really clearly and be informed in simple terms they can understand. And the BBC may do it in a very sort of, some people may feel it's a very conventional, slightly flonking way sometimes. When I was 20, 30 years ago, we used to have things called Bexpos, brief expositions off the back of the news, which is, 10 facts you needed to know about this issue, bluntly, done on graphics on the 6 o'clock news. Now there's a better way of doing it, and it's a way that people respond to and share and move around, but it's the same thing, it's delivering...
Okay, but the way it's being branded, Richard, is that something needs debunking, which means there are people out there bunking, whether they're on Twitter or on mainstream media, and that kind of feels new to me, and maybe... But it's just a new brand.
No, but that's the truth. We talk endlessly about this. That's the trust issue. There's so much noise out there, and there's so much opinion. We're awash with uninformed opinion. And when you can actually find some evidence, and you can find something that's a really clear nugget, and say, actually, this is what it is, and here's the evidence and why, people will latch onto it. Definitely. We're sure of evidence.
Tim, on the issue of trust, when you see Vice.
Sorry. One of you were talking to. Sorry.
It's okay, Roger.
On the issue of trust, when you see Vice and organizations come up like that, and boom, do you trust them?
Do I trust them?
Yeah.
I tend not to trust much, but I would say, what I saw just then, I didn't feel there was anything that I wouldn't trust, because it was very immediate. It was it looked like everything. It was showing everything that was happening. There was nothing in there, and I inherently distrusted. In terms of the debunking thing, the problem with debunking for the sake of debunking is actually no more true than bunking for the sake of bunking. And in the end, it's not actually necessarily right. And at some point, you will have a trust issue over that. You know, you can't just debunk something because it's a good position to take if it turns out to have been a load of absolute, nonsense. So I haven't seen, as I said, I haven't seen anything to distrust about Vice. I suppose people here appear, and naturally as journalists, we distrust the hype. We're sort of pre-programmed to do a bit of that. And that will be, as we keep coming back to, and I apologise for that, the challenge for you is when people start trying to debunk it a bit in that way.
I don't know where the microphone is. It's over here. Go ahead.
I'm Alex from Broadcast Magazine. My question was really aimed at Tom, but more widely. We've talked. I'm interested in the impact of these new school news organisations like Vice that they're going to have back on traditional broadcast. I mean, one thing you said that I thought was interesting was that you feel straitjacketed by the fact that you've got to make this package for Panorama at 8 p.m. on a X amount of time. But when you look at things like BBC Three going online, and you look at the reach the BBC has online, and the iPlayer, etc., I mean, to what extent does the BBC need to evolve and adapt and react and learn from the kinds of things that these guys are doing?
Is my mic working? You can probably hear me anyway. To what extent? Well, I'd have thought if it's got any sense, to a pretty limitless extent. I can't imagine. Obviously, we have the BBC, because of the trust issues that you're talking about in general. The BBC can't get involved in something that's just wrong because there's so many apparatus out there that will come and pull that apart. I mean, we face that all the time, even when we're completely right, which of course we're not very often. But most of the time we are. I would say that that energy and the sort of way in which it's taking people to international affairs, the sort of stuff that BBC aspires to make people interested in, to an international audience, that the BBC should be projecting towards. There's absolutely everything about that the BBC should be interested in.
But I mean,
and there's every evidence that it is and that it will be.
In terms of practical and the way in which these guys approach a story, and they're talking about vines and tweets, and I mean,
I think the BBC's doing pretty well. I look at Instafacts on Instagram. I think it's a really interesting innovation. So I mean, I think they've got a lot of R&D going on in this area. The whole visual journalism team is doing some very interesting innovation. I'm not there anymore. I've been out for 5 years, but this is what I kind of see already. And find the review of BBC News by the Trust and the rest of it very sort of constitutionally dull thing, but important for the BBC, has come out and said you've got to really drive into mobile platforms for younger audiences in ways they're going to engage with better. So it's right up to the top of the 2 or 3 things that BBC News has got to think about over the next few years. But the difficulty is how they pay for it when all the budget's being cut, and anything they try and pull money out of, people react in horror and say you can't possibly stop doing that.
But you mentioned, for example, BBC Three, just to throw a little bit wider than just news. In terms of their long-form take on the world, I'd have thought that would be something that BBC Three would see as a sort of natural sort of fit. And I don't think it's not that far away from, as you said, Kevin, at times from Unreported World. I can't imagine that a strand like Unreported World wouldn't be interested in the sort of material and the general grammar and the general culture that it throws up around the sort of material we saw earlier that Vice are doing. The big test is whether we're going to take the long pieces that I come back to Ben again without trying to embarrass him, but the sort of long 90-minute, this is what winning looks like, take a controversial, proper political take on the war in Afghanistan. Vice, what I really admire, or I suppose I'm jealous of in some ways about what Vice can do, is he can take material that he shot for me, and I can do it as half an hour, and it's perfectly effective. It was a bloody good film, and I'm very proud of it. But he can just stretch it out and do a proper 90-minute take on something that has real traction, especially in the United States.
Why won't the BBC publish the
well, it could, because again, I suppose it's a bit of what I'm saying before. to finish it off online, Vice wanted ownership of it. They put the money in to sort of take it and make it themselves, and they did very well with it. And I'm perfectly happy to cooperate with that. But it's like I said before, it's the constraints, if you like, of our form, and we're wrestling with that, which is why we'd be interested in Vice going forward as a digital and multi-platform news provider. But the form means that I can't just say, right, now I want 90 minutes.
But isn't that part of the problem?
Yeah.
Hold on a second.
It's purely television.
I know.
Not
But
considering, okay, well, actually, maybe we'll do it.
you'll have to forgive me a moment because I'm sort of slightly focused on my television program. But you're which is enough of a problem anyway. But you're absolutely right, and we have to. I think we've realised, and we're realising that we've got to kick away from that. And actually, that is something that the Trust report threw up quite clearly. It's a real challenge for us.
Kevin, what's the longest film Vice puts up on its site?
Well, it's put up some very long pieces. I mean, at the moment we're doing on news 30 minutes. But in other parts of our factual output, we're doing feature docs.
Feature doc runs how long?
75 to 90. I mean, we've got the flexibility to have Ben make something like that, or to have a feature doc.
How does that stuff do insofar as clickbait?
I couldn't tell you, actually. The feature doc isn't the one I'm looking after, isn't out at the moment, so I'm not sure. But I was just going to make a slight different point about the BBC, which I think it was the Sudan film you saw, which we had a sort of couple of bites out. We did a short piece and a longer piece, and the same ambush. The BBC were there, and they put out a really good short piece from Alistair Leithhead. And then I think I noticed somewhere that they put out a longer effectively version, and was referred to as the sort of Vice version, or Viceness of it, by someone at the BBC. I think it might have been James Harding, but I may be wrong. But it did make me think, why isn't it more the point that the BBC should just do what it's good at, and not necessarily acquire and try and sort of slip into all other areas of life, and that what it's really good at, what it's got a fantastic history of, and I'm part of that as well, is the way it's got trust in its reporting and the way it goes about things. And in a way to then go, oh no, we must now panic because what's coming down the line.
I'm sure there's no panic.
It just occurs to me, just as a sort of, why does the BBC need to do that?
I think because everyone's got. Yeah, thank you.
I don't know. I'm just asking.
Didn't they want to acquire a cooking channel at one stage? There was a question at the back here.
John Owen. My sense is, unless I'm wrong, that most of the reporting for Vice is done by what we would call traditionally parachute journalists going to a country. Do you see going in the direction of Al Jazeera or increasingly BBC using locals, nationals, individuals in their own country to trained up to do the Vice reporting in those countries, or are you going to stick to your own, what appears to be a traditional model?
Well, obviously we're English language at the moment, but the offices around the world have people who are going to be making things for us. So local knowledge is really good. Being able to slip in and out of local language and English is essential for us as well. So yes, local reporters, local knowledge is what we're trying to build. We need to build that up. Again, we're starting quite early. We're quite early on now, but we've got the offices to build on. We're trying to put that expertise into those offices as well, so that we can call on quality, reach out to Germany, reach out to South Africa, reach out, so that makes that a really useful option to us. We also put people into places who've got local knowledge as filmmakers. So in Syria, it's a sort of, there are filmmakers who can work in Syria where our hosts can't. So again, we're making choices about who we might send or who we might access in a region. So I think it's very important that you sort of keep all those options open.
Just one more question at the back.
Hi, Jasper Jackson from Media Briefing again. So both BuzzFeed and Vice benefit from not having to follow the news agenda, but you're competing for both advertising money and also attention with the legacy media, or whatever you call it. If you're competing with them, but you don't have to follow the news agenda, what happens when the people creating the news agenda start to run out of money or resources to create it? who's going to create the news agenda when these organisations don't have the resources to actually keep actually covering the day-to-day news stories, the day-to-day politics stuff, the day-to-day war stories?
How are you going to go there if there's no there there? I think that's what he's asking.
Personally, I can't ever envisage a time when there will be a no there, so I'm not that worried about it. And if there is a no there, well, that's even better. We can go take that as well, so I'm not worried about it.
I mean, there's a massive appetite. I mean, the reason we come into existence is a massive appetite for foreign affairs. We've got a huge engagement in foreign affairs reporting. It's enormous, and I think that's just going to keep going. And we're going to go there. Even when people aren't, we've got our own agenda. We're not following some news cycle of someone else. We're deciding where to go, and we can afford to go there, and we can afford to bring that back and put it on the site.
That's all we have time for. I'd like to thank the panel. I want to apologize personally to Tom. I had two names I had to remember on this panel. Got one of them wrong. So I'm dreadfully sorry about that.
Sorry.
Interesting evening. Vice is an interesting company to look at. BuzzFeed, too. I mean, we're all spending more time on BuzzFeed now, I'm sure, than we were a year ago. And I want to thank Richard and Tom, and Richard and Kevin, and we'll see you downstairs at the bar.
Cool.